got some stuff you never see on the tour. For instance, like the bathtubs I showed you or some other things that I pointed out. I thought this one was pretty cool. I just found this not that long ago. And so this is somewhat still new to me. So behind this door, it's kind of something I think should be on every Capitol tour. I mean, it's kind of important. So you see this stone here, but let's read what it says here. Beneath this tablet cornerstone of the Capitol of the United States was laid by George Washington, first president, September 18th, 1793. So below this stone here. What I don't understand is why this stone is here, because this was laid in 1932, why they wouldn't just take this out and put glass there. I'm actually going to bring that up with the Capitol architect, because I think it'd be a much, I don't know, cooler feature or historically better to actually have the original stone that George Washington laid by his own hands with a glass overtop than this one covering it. But either way, like I said, the whole goal is to show you some things or tell you some things that you probably wouldn't see on a Capitol tour. So there you go.
Well, good morning, Patriots. How are you guys doing this morning? Welcome back to another episode. Gosh dang, yeah, Alligator Alcatraz, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry, I got some stuff on that for you. I already see you guys dropping that down in the comment section. We're also going to be talking about what happened over inside of Russia today, because it's a big deal. Told you guys about Ukraine knocking out Russia's aerial defense assets, and it looks like they went even just a tad bit deeper, which I believe is going to be telling of the times to come. We'll explain that here in just a little bit. Also, we're going to go over into Gaza, because some new information actually came out of there. It looks like the IDF had released some interviews, phone calls, etc., with some of the Gazans that are on the ground over there. I actually reached out to the private military contractors distributing aid over in Gaza, because I want to be able to go and get on the ground with them to start covering the story in person. Why? Because there is lots of mis and disinformation that is floating around about what those PMCs are doing. And I personally don't feel like having their names smeared while they're sitting out there trying to deliver aid to people that are hungry, and Hamas is out there killing civilians, trying to blame it on them and the IDF. It's just not cool to me. But before we get into all of those different stories that we've got, plus a little bit more, I'm going to take you guys over to Alligator Alcatraz. Benny Johnson, of all people, was actually on the ground over there. Earlier this morning, Trump did take off and head over to Alcatraz. For those of you guys that don't know, this is a new detention facility that's being opened up inside of the Florida Everglades. It's surrounded by nothing but alligators, thus the name Alligator Alcatraz. They started building on it. It just took them about 72 hours to construct the entire facility. I got a video from inside of there so you guys can actually see what it looks like. Hancock Faraday already coming in, gifting out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. Let's go ahead and get this up on your guys' screen so you guys get an idea of what's going on out there.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to Alligator Alcatraz. The entrance here is a 30-foot tall wall. None of this was here 5 days ago. It's got razor wire on the top. Just unbelievably impressive what the state of Florida has done here. Over my shoulder is the actual facility. As you can see, we'll be entering soon. This is the entry gate for Alligator Alcatraz. Whew, got mosquitoes everywhere. Like playing. There you go. Look at that. Not a fun place to be put in prison. You do not want to go here. Obviously, this is...
That's enough. That's all you really need to know. He said he ends up driving a bunch of hours to get out there. But the thing that made me put this video up on the screen is because it actually reminded me of when I was going through Ranger School down at Florida Phase and walking through some of those dang swamps. And dude, the mosquitoes down there, those things are like gosh dang pterodactyls, man. They are freaking huge. And if you've never experienced those dang things, I highly suggest, well, I wouldn't highly suggest it, but it is really interesting because these dang things are like prehistoric mosquitoes that just end up eating the freaking crap out of you while you're down there. Let's go over there. He actually ended up shooting a video a little bit like, I don't know, probably about an hour or so after that shows the inside of what that prison facility actually looks like. It said that there's only one way in and one way out. The way in is down that big road that he was on, and the only way out for the prisoners once they get in there is via one-way flights to whatever home country they came from. And just looking at this place, you know what this actually reminds me of? This facility actually reminds me of, I forget the name of the sheriff that was down in Arizona that had the tent city set up for like all of his felons and stuff, or anybody that ended up going into prison. That's what this looks like. I am okay with spending this amount of money. This is jack in crap. This is precisely what this country needs. I think they went a little bit overboard on the floor there. You can take a look. It looks like stones or something. I don't know. But either way, man, you take a look, dude. It's very basic, very simple. You got freaking cots. You got fences. This reminds me of nothing worse than what our service members sleep in when they enter into boot camp, basic training, etc. You don't need anything more fancy than that. You don't get a TV. You don't get any of that garbage. You're here inside of this country illegally. We're throwing you in a damn cell. If you try to escape, the alligators are going to eat you. And you can hop your happy ass on a flight and make your way back to wherever it is you came from. If you don't like it, stop breaking the law. I can't say that enough. Prison is not meant to be something tolerable or nice and pretty for everybody to freaking have, all right? Now, I want to bring this up, and I want to put this up on the screen. This video is a little bit older. We're going to jump over across the seas, and we're going to go, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? We're going to take you guys up over into Ukraine, over inside of Ukraine, all right? We're going to go, and we're going to focus down on these little areas over here. Now, this is what I believe is making up for these different shaping operations. So Russia, in order to get supplies down into Crimea, has to get them in one of two ways. For those of you guys who are not all caught up on the complete and total geography, what you're looking at right down here, this little freaking peninsula floating off in the middle of nowhere, that's Crimea. Russia's got a railway that ends up coming out of here. It's all in Russian-occupied Ukraine. And they feed a lot of supplies via that railway, not just into Crimea, but also into some of the other occupied regions in southern Ukraine. Andrew Doney says, do you have any cool venomous snakes or spider stories from your time in SF? Yeah, I mean, venomous snake stories, like I run across them in Ranger School quite a bit, actually. You want to hear a weird Ranger School story before I get into this? Like we stayed up all flipping night down in Florida phase because somebody wandered off, right? And so we ended up searching for this guy forever, and it was one of those nights that suck so bad you end up getting administrative sleep time. And so they put us all in a tight little, they put my platoon in a tight little formation, and we're like, you got 15 minutes to sleep, get it done. So we all just dropped our rucks and freaking laid down and passed out for 15 minutes, right? We wake up, and no kidding, as we start putting getting our rucks and stuff together and getting ready to go set up our freaking perimeter, as soon as that happens, there's this huge thunderstorm that comes like rolling through. Just this freak random thunderstorm comes in, and it just freaking like hammers on us for like 1 minute. Can't make it up. It was just this random 1 minute, just boom, like just slam. And as soon as that rain like clears, I kid you not, there was like this bear that just went running probably like 15 meters in front of our platoon. Just came dead ass sprint right in front of the entire freaking platoon. Just took off at a dead sprint. And we ended up sitting there for the better part of the morning before we ended up starting our movement to get going wherever the heck it was we were going. Obviously, we didn't sit there in our little platoon formation, but when we packed up, when we went to go leave, as we're walking out of there, dude, probably the biggest eastern diamondback rattlesnake that I ever have seen was just down there. I mean, just a massive eastern diamondback that we were all just walking right past. The thing was about yay round and God only knows how long, and it wasn't like it was fat or had just eaten or anything, but that thing was massive. I mean, absolutely massive. I can tell you stories about, what was it? African rock pythons I came across over inside like Central and East Africa. Those things were freaking insane. Yeah. MT, did you hear Trump called Candace Owens to ask her to stop talking about Macron's wife's gender? Otherwise, Macron won't engage in Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Candace Owens ragging on Macron's wife. That's the big issue. Austin says alligators and snakes. Yeah, that's about all outside of that Alcatraz area over there. But me personally, like, would I want to run away from that facility? Absolutely not. All right, let's get back over here and start talking about this again. So you've got the Russian rail line that ends up coming down here and feeding, okay, everything down into the southern portion of Ukraine. And then you also have the rail line that comes across the Kerch Bridge. And those things have been fairly well protected. They've been building up over time. I don't like them big snakes, big toe. Oh my gosh, calm down. Big toe, excuse me. However you want to say, freaking whatever. All right, so that's down in southern Ukraine, right? That's what's going in there. This next video that I put up is kind of important for you to understand because you got to also look at this. Like over the last 24 to 48 hours, Ukraine has actually been targeting Russian S-3 and S-400 systems down inside of Crimea. For those of you guys that don't know, those are the aerial defense assets, right? And those aerial defense assets are very, very important for keeping that bridge safe and keeping basically Crimea from getting slammed by different airstrikes. But the drones have been getting through. And this isn't new. Ukraine's launched a lot of different drone strikes and things like that down on Crimea before in the past, a lot of different cruise missile strikes and stuff like that. What I found was really actually interesting was this video right here that's from just a couple days ago. And this shows them actually targeting the rail line down there, going through southern Ukraine. Now, that rail line, like I said, is like a lifeline. Now, for reference, it doesn't look like they actually knocked out that much of the rail line for it to be important. And I want you guys to understand this, right? It is said that this ended up shutting down that rail line for quite like a couple days before Russia was able to get it back up and running again. Now, if you want to effectively knock out train tracks so trains can't pass over it, what Russia would have discovered if they would have tried, even driving over this sucker slow, is the train would have just basically skipped right over top of that, right? Like you need a big cut of the track, preferably on a curb, in order to actually effectively take it down. But Ukrainian SBU not only knocked it out this time, but a couple days later, they ended up going in and knocking it out again, shutting it down again. So to me, this is showing that Ukrainian SBU is trying to isolate that particular area. They want to shut down the flow of supplies. They also targeted a train. Totally forgot to tell you guys about that. But what they're effectively trying to do is cut down on the flow of supplies that are going into Crimea, right? Slowing down on all of that stuff. And that's super important because if I want to start launching some sort of attack, like the first thing that I want to do is I want to go after these different guys' supply lines over there, right? Like I want to start taking care of that. And in order to do that, like I said, you've got the Kerch Bridge and you've got like the railroad tracks that are down there in the south. Now, it's also rumored, all right, and I brought this up last night, that the Chechens from Russia are now starting to move in over into like basically north of Melitopol and getting ready to launch a major assault going up over into Zaporizhia, which is, I mean, that's a thing, right? Like I predicted that probably about a month ago, saying that, yeah, I understand that Russia is, pushing for this major assault up over in the Sumy Oblast, and they, as predicted, they ended up getting held up in that choke point that Ukraine had set out for them. But also, I think that they're going to launch this assault down in Zaporizhia. So that, it looks like it's starting to form and start taking place. But I think there's something else that's brewing that's going to end up kind of basically thwarting that assault, which is going to be forcing Russia to start defending Crimea. And again, knocking out the railroad tracks and taking out those systems is one thing. But, those systems can end up getting replaced. But kind of how everybody was talking over inside of, how do I want to say this? How everybody was talking over inside of Israel when, they're doing this back and forth fighting with Iran, and everybody's worried that, hey, Israel's going to run out of aerial defense systems, right? Like they're going to run out of freaking missiles to shoot up in the air and start knocking some of these things down. They're going to get low, basically saying that Israel can't keep up forever. Well, that is quasi true, right? But the other thing that Ukraine's doing on top of knocking out those systems, right, so that they don't have to worry about it, is they're doing this.
Сейчас опять?
А, да, ебать. Охуеть. Пиздец. Конкретно.
Господи.
So what are you looking at here in these videos? What you're actually looking at is you're looking at the Russian factory that's 1,200 kilometers deep into Russia that was getting hit by Ukrainian drones. So we saw those aerial defense assets over Crimea get knocked out, or excuse me, inside Crimea get knocked out over the last like 24 to 48 hours. And now we're getting these deep strikes into Russia where they're actually going after the factory that is producing the short to long range missiles that Russia would end up shooting in order to like defend their own airspace. So not only are we not only is Ukraine going in and knocking out their systems, but now they're going in and knocking out the supply, basically like the supply for those particular systems. And that is very telling of the times to come, because if Ukraine is successful in this, shutting down Russian aerial defense takes out a big role that opens up a lot of freaking possibilities for Ukraine, particularly when you start talking about Crimea. CR says, can we get a story time with Matt? Some close calls and experiences of your service. Keep up the great work, brother. It's not something that I do. There's a lot of guys that'll come in and they will brag about the different things that they've done. I really don't see a point in doing that. I think that there is a lot of people on this planet that have done a hell of a lot more than me, that are alive, and there is even more so that are dead. And I like telling stories about those guys, and the different things that they've done. Yeah, I've had some close calls in my day. I really have. But at the end of the day, number one, I just think that it's silly to go over those different things. I do. Okay. And it takes away from the overall, how do I want to say this? It takes away from the overall story of what actually took place and the other sacrifices that people did. I really don't care to have the attention on me for those different things, and would rather have it on those guys that gave their lives, or those ones that ended up getting wounded, or just the overall, story in general. The one story that I ended up telling the other day was like my favorite, most proud accomplishment from over inside of Afghanistan was having an all-girls school get reopened and things of that nature. Like I'm more than happy to talk about things like that, because I think those are the stories that actually impact the people, that actually change their brains, and cause, this basically spark that people are looking for over inside of Iran, for example, to have like those types of uprisings. It's those positive memories, those positive thoughts that actually make a change on the ground. I don't know how else to tell you this, man, but anybody can get shot at and anybody can shoot back. It takes 5.5 pounds of pressure to pull a freaking trigger. It's not exactly the most intensive thing on the freaking planet, right? So I'd never really looked at that as something that's like exceptionally like manly in any way, shape, or form. Anybody can sit in a hole and get shelled, right? People that choose to do that, obviously, I do believe that they need to be elevated a little bit more, things of that nature. And I'm very proud of my service. I'm proud of everybody else's service. But at the end of the day, taking away from the overall mission by focusing on yourself and trying to paint yourself out to be a Billy badass carrying around a bag of hand grenades, not exactly something that I'm very interested in doing. So, sorry, brother. There's lots of other influencer guys out there that are willing to do stuff like that. It's just not me, man. All right, let's take you guys over, and I'm going to show you on the ground inside Russia at that factory as those drones are slamming into it and the secondary explosions that are coming out of it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's funny to see some of the comments now after I make all those statements of what's going on and what you guys actually think about that. Now, this, obviously, you can hear some of the secondary explosions and things like that that are going off in the background. But again, this factory is what's producing all those aerial defense munitions over inside of Russia to be used on the Ukrainian front line. So not only did they knock out all of that stuff, but like over inside of Crimea, but they're going after the supply. And that is really the important portion of this. Yeah, guys, hey, listen, there is over 1,200 people watching this. We had like 4,000 people in here last night. Ladies and gentlemen, like this stream, share this stream, make sure you're putting this information out there, make sure you're blasting it out to other people. You know what I mean? Like it's I don't know, it's important to be able to spread this stuff. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, I don't know what the hell you're doing with your life. Zelensky as well. I know we ended up having some questions yesterday about the strike that took place over inside of Iran against the IRGC officials. And there's people saying, well, is it possible that Ukraine conducted that strike? Because, Ukraine's very upset. Over 35% of the aerial munitions that are flying across the Russian border into Ukraine end up having Iranian components, Iranian designs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Iran plays a big part in the war effort that Russia is imposing on Ukraine right now, right? And so what I said was, no, I don't believe that to be the case. I don't think that Ukraine is the one that conducted the strike over inside of Tehran yesterday, because Ukraine's got enough crap to deal with. They've got enough things on their plate, and what they don't need is Iran shooting ballistic missiles at Ukraine, and they do have the ability to launch them all the way up into Ukraine. And I don't think Ukraine really needs any more of that crap. What I do think that they're doing is things like this. Oh, and by the way, not to mention Israel ended up knocking out those drone factories anyways, because it ends up, helping out Israel not to have a bunch of Iranian drones being fired at them. Same thing. That also helps out Ukraine. Well, Zelensky ended up making an announcement that Ukraine is imposing sanctions on Iran as well.
Наші інституції почали виконувати рішення РНБО України щодо синхронізації санкцій Європи та українських санкцій. Повністю синхронізовані 13 та 14 пакети санкцій ЄС. Це тепер будуть на 100% також санкції України.
There you go. The 13th and 14th rounds of sanctions are actually 100% unilateral from Ukraine in conjunction with the UN. And those are going to be imposed on Iran. So I do believe that they will continue to do things like this on Iran in order to try to affect a war effort. But Israel's got a deep enough freaking hand over inside. Like they are basically like hand up the butt of freaking like Iran right now, right? Like they are deep in that thing, playing it like a puppet master. So I don't think that Ukraine really needs to do anything about it, because the Ukrainian war effort and the Israeli war effort are pretty much combined. And those Iranian drones, along with everything else, yeah, it's beneficial to both freaking nations that they end up taking it out. And while Israel is busy wanting to like defend their own nation, they're also inadvertently actually impacting and affecting the Ukrainian war. So that's a very good thing, is that kind of happens. But Zelensky, yeah, he's going to do those sanctions. He's going to make that happen. Why? Because it has a big effort over on the front line. It might not seem like a lot to a lot of people, but what it's doing is it's actually affecting, right? It's actually affecting some of the other things that are taking place. And I kind of appreciate the crap out of that. Now we're going to go from talking about Ukraine, and we're going to exit out of there, and we're going to go back down into the Middle East, and we're going to zoom in. Obviously, here we have Tehran and Iran and everything that we're talking about. We're going to go down into Israel, and we're going to go and we're going to focus on Gaza for a minute, and we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on over inside Gaza, because there is a lot of information that is now starting to flow out of Gaza. There's not a lot of videos, but there is a lot of information that's flowing out of Gaza. Particularly at the humanitarian aid distribution points. I ended up seeing a video earlier that I'm going to put up on the screen here in a minute that's probably going to blow your damn mind. You guys remember how it all started off all organized and things like that? Well, it's turned extremely chaotic. And Hamas has been doing a very good job targeting the civilians. I told you guys that I was getting reports that Hamas is chucking freaking grenades at these people and shooting them up. I showed you guys a couple of videos of alleged Hamas fighters that are shooting up people that are going out to get humanitarian aid. Heard plenty of reports that as people are going over to get humanitarian aid inside Gaza, that they are getting freaking shot up as well. That essentially that, they're being targeted. And so what that ultimately amounts to is people not wanting to go in and get those things out of there. What I have for you right here is audio that ended up getting released by the IDF talking to somebody over inside of Gaza that's describing the attacks that ended up taking place. Now, I'm going to show you something else in all fairness that kind of like makes my freaking head explode here in just a sec. But here we go. Officer, what happened today in Rafah? What do you think about it? Hamas says that there was gunfire there, but no one from our army shot at anybody. There was no gunfire whatsoever. Gaza resident. Look, this is how Hamas forces operate. They shoot the people on deliberately because they treat those people like thieves. They want to show the people the army is shooting at them. So they're the ones who are firing today? Of course. There's no one else there who would do it. Okay, why doesn't anyone come forward? No one's brave enough to do so? Those people are sons of biatches. Officer, what happened today in Rafah? So there you go. You've got Gaza residents that are coming out. If you guys want to hear the audio and not have Matt talk so you can hear their voice, I can do that for you.
شو رايك فيها انت؟ حماس بتقول كان في غد طخ، بس الجيش عندنا ما طخش حدا اليوم. ما كانش في اطلاق نار بالمره. نعم.
مواد حماس بتشتغل زي هذول وهم بيتعمدوا يطخوا على الناس. بيتعمدوا يعني بيتعاملوا مع الناس، هذول الناس حراميه وهذول الناس هم يروحوا. بده يورجوا الناس انه الجيش هتطخ ومحدش يروح حياته.
يعني هن اللي طخوا اليوم.
اكيد. مش غيرهم خوش شرموطه بسويها.
طيب وليه ما حدا بيطلع بيحكي عنهم في الاخبار؟ ما حدا بيسترجي؟
الناس شرميطه هاي.
Now, Keith Lewis, I see you down there saying you're listening while you're working. I want you to know, brother, that it's because of blue-collar workers or whatever it is that you do out there, guys like you that are just trying to get stuff done. I am specifically reading off all of these things for guys like you because, you know what? I listen to the comments. I get your guys' DMs. I see those things. I'm out there, and I try to respond to help you guys out, make the show just a little bit better. Now, in addition to all of that, there's something else that is taking place. Again, because we're talking about the humanitarian aid that goes into it. This one, I'm not even sure how I ended up finding this. Came out a couple days ago. Again, completely and totally missed from my radar. But the Trump administration announced a $30 million in funding for Gaza aid group called the Death Trap by the UN. What are they talking about? Well, they are talking about, all right, they are talking about the private military contractors that are over inside of Gaza that are distributing the humanitarian aid. This project is not going anywhere. And the fact that the Trump administration just a couple days ago actually ended up putting $30 million in additional funding, all right, for that humanitarian aid distribution is very telling that they need a heck of a lot more support on the ground. Now, I don't think that all of this is going to end up going to food. I really don't. I think that what this is going to go towards is additional security measures, and I think they're going to actually start capturing it. My question is, with these PMCs going in there, me personally, I remember telling you guys before this even happened, hearing that this was going to be like the way it was going to go down, and telling you guys that Hamas is going to end up targeting the civilians that are going in there. They're doing that for several different reasons. They are trying to make it seem like, number one, the IDF is shooting at these people. Number two, that they have no control, all right, over the humanitarian aid distribution. Mostly, it is affecting a buttload of Hamas funding and control over the population, right? So a buttload of control over the population. If Hamas is able to take that food, force them to come to them, force them to buy it off the market, they're able to further push themselves a little bit deeper. But the other big thing that Hamas knows, that everybody else knows, is there's likely a lot of intel collection that's taking place at these humanitarian aid distribution points. And so Hamas doesn't want the people going in there, and they're trying to scare them to get away. But the Trump administration looks like it's doubling down, throwing $30 million more at this private security contracting firm from the United States of America in order to bolster up everything. Now, I have absolutely zero doubt that some of this is going to include some different security systems, raid cameras, things like that, all right, so that we actually start getting a video evidence of what's taking place on the ground. And I would expect this PMC to actually start releasing those videos sometime here in the near future. Matt, like most good vets, didn't do it for the glory. Yep, that's just kind of a thing, man. I just had fun and enjoyed the paycheck while I was doing it and wanted to make sure that people were taken care of. I'll tell you, when I first started doing it, when I joined the military, I was kind of bought into the narrative that we're out here, we're fighting terrorism, we're saving America, we're doing things for the homeland, and then you end up getting on the ground and you end up getting the ground truth of what's taking place. And then it ends up being that, while I have seen different things that, would tell me that we are there for the right reasons and we are doing things for the right reasons, where my heart really went was to the people that were being adversely affected by the conflict. Some of them I didn't like, some of them I did like. And what I learned was the old American adage, let's just turn the Middle East into glass. I hate that. I think that is one of the most ignorant statements that you could ever say, or ignorant statements that you could ever do. The Middle East shouldn't be turned into glass, right? It's just not the case. Take a look over inside of Iran, for crying out loud. You got a buttload of people that are pissed off at the current Iranian regime that want to have a revolution, but they can't quite get there, right? So no, I don't believe in that. Not to mention there is just a bunch of innocent people, for everybody that is complaining about a alleged genocide over inside of Gaza. What they are failing to do and failing to bring up to everybody else is the genocides, the actual genocides that are taking place in countries like Syria, that are taking place in places like Iran, that are taking place in Sudan, which are taking place across Africa, right? All of those are actual genocides. And if they really gave a shit about human rights, they would say something. And probably one of the most profound, well-documented cases of actual war crimes and violations is taking place over inside of Ukraine. And nobody cares. Nobody. Why? Because there's a false narrative that got pushed. There's a false narrative that Trump loves Russia. There's a false narrative that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi state. There's a false narrative of all sorts of crap that's taking place. And sadly, that type of mis and disinformation that's been pushed, in Matt's opinion, by Russia and Iran, all right, are what is actually causing people to not care. And that's really sad, because if you actually care about human rights and you care about what's taking place, you would care when you see apartment buildings getting absolutely decimated by Shahed drones over inside of Ukraine. You would absolutely care when ballistic missiles are slamming into apartments, not just inside of Ukraine, but also over inside of Israel. You would actually care about those things, right? You would care. The problem is these people don't. And you know what else you would care about? You'd care about videos like this. Thanks, Reaper, for showing up. Now, here's what you're looking at in this video. You're looking at an absolute horde of people that are raiding humanitarian aid trucks as they're entering over into Gaza. It is being said that Hamas is orchestrating a bunch of information about all of this crap. So all of these civilians, these are clearly civilians. This is not Hamas. These are civilians that are just raiding humanitarian aid, doing their best to get a hold of crap and running off with it. And what is being said is that Hamas is actually leaking a bunch of this information for these civilians. And so it's not only are they shooting them up as they're going over to collect the aid, Hamas is then taking information about where they are going to be moving the aid in from and when, and telling the civilians about it. And then you got civilians that are going over and raiding all of this crap, because that's much more palatable to Hamas's narrative than it is to have it being distributed legally and properly by those civilian contractors and by the Israeli Defense Forces and by the proxy forces that have stood up against Hamas. Absolutely amazing. Even with all of this crap going on, believe it or not, I think it's this clip that I have right back here. Hope I got the right one up. Donald Trump actually says that he thinks that there is going to be a ceasefire in Gaza next week.
We hope it's going to happen, and we're looking forward to happen sometime next week. We want to get our hostages out. We want to get the hostages out.
Now, that interview ended up coming out as he was on his way going over to Alligator Alcatraz, which is a great place. I know a lot of you guys are interested in that. Personally, I don't care. I think it's a PR stunt. I could give two shits less about it, right? But what this shows me is the information that's being provided to Trump. Now, if Trump somehow has information that Hamas has agreed to doing all of this, allegedly what it is, isn't ceasefire in Gaza a bad idea? Yeah, Keith Lewis, it is. It's a horrible idea. And I don't think it's going to go through. This has been rumored for about a week now that within 2 weeks, this ceasefire is going to take place. And the Trump administration says that they're pretty close to one and they feel like it's actually going to happen. The information that I actually got from the ceasefire is that Hamas is asking on their side to have all of the IDF removed from the Gaza Strip. That is a no-go for Israel. That is a no-go for Netanyahu, and they're never going to agree to back out of the Gaza Strip completely and totally. Israel still has the same objectives it has since the beginning of the war, which is the decimation of Hamas and the returning of all the hostages and ultimately the safety of the people over inside of Israel. So with that being said, there is not a snowball's chance in hell that Israel is going to end up backing out there. On the Israeli side, what I heard is on the table is that Israel is okay with doing a ceasefire. But in order to make that happen, what Israel is saying is they are not leaving Gaza and that Hamas is essentially going to get deported. Any of these high-level leadership Hamas fighters, they get a free pass. And they're going to get exiled to some other country somewhere, I don't know, to go live out the remainder of their days. They'll probably make a shitload of money, and they'll be gone. It'll be cheaper for Israel to pay those people off and send them off, and Hamas to pay those people and send them off, than it is to continue on with this war and this conflict. It's just how it is. So with all of that said, is this actually going down? I don't think so. And I think Trump's advisors likely need to get their asses fired unless Trump knows some information that we don't, which is very likely. I mean, he's the president of the United States of America, but we've seen this narrative before come out. We saw it before when he was talking about knowing that he was going to end up having, the war inside of Ukraine ended within like the first 100 days in office or the day after he gets in office. We've seen it before when he said that we're so close to having a freaking, deal with freaking Iran. Right? They're very close to having the deal with Iran. And then even after we bomb the crap out of Iran, the U.S. intelligence ends up saying, listen, we're positive that we ended up knocking out all of their, uranium enrichment capabilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the IAEA comes out and ends up saying, you know what? There actually might be spinning uranium right now. And we just set them back a couple months. That's a freaking problem. Right. And so when I see Trump say statements like this, I almost want to grab and slap whoever it is that's feeding him this information, because there is just things that are writing on the wall for everybody with common sense that looks at this scenario and goes, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that Hamas is giving up, because we understand their like radical religious ideology and what exactly it is they're fighting for. Retired EMTP says, Matt, did you see Palestinian security forces doing ops with the IDF? I have seen Palestinian security forces doing ops on their own unilaterally. I have heard rumors of the Palestinian security forces down in the south that are helping to guard the humanitarian aid convoys. But I have seen one video, I believe, of that the Palestinian security forces. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. I want to say it's like Abu Shabab, I think, is like the security forces leader down there in the south. And I saw one video of them escorting, basically leading out an IDF patrol that was heading over allegedly to the humanitarian aid sites, basically helping to deliver stuff. It is said that they are not they're not conducting combat operations with the IDF, but what they're doing is they are kind of assisting in those little short movements and things like that. And I think what they're doing is essentially training them, building them up down inside Rafah, and eventually they're going to start running joint operations with those guys. And so that's a sign of things to come, right? Like that is your, Palestinian security forces are going to be pushing forward in the future in order to kind of, like start working after Hamas is gone. Those are likely going to be the people that are going to end up policing the society. And I mean that quite literally, until we get like the established leadership and everything else. But the other good thing about those guys is they're also going to be what's being used to start recruiting more security forces over inside of Gaza after all this crap is said and done. Now, I remind you guys that there's still hostages that are stuck over inside of there. People that have been held captive for 20 plus months over inside of Gaza that are believed to be still alive. Israel is not going to leave until they get those people back. They're just not. And I don't think that they're willing, after the last agreed upon hostage exchange or whatever, I don't believe that Israel is going to be willing to actually take Hamas for their word and back out of Gaza to make that happen. Now, with that being said, fighting over inside of Gaza has intensified within the last like 48 to 72 hours. We've got new units that are moving back into Gaza, and we've got a lot of bombs that are being dropped over inside of Khan Yunis. A lot of bombs are being dropped inside of Gaza City. A lot of bombs are being dropped down in kind of like the Rafah area, right? And all of that's going on. I told you guys last week after a particular incident, before it ended up happening, I said, listen, things are going to start intensifying, and here's why. All right, this is the video I ended up not showing you guys, all right, that Hamas ended up releasing, and I'm just going to do my best to mute the sucker as I hit play. This is the video that Hamas ended up releasing that ended up causing a mass casualty incident over inside of Gaza last week. They went up over to this APC and ended up throwing an EFP right into the freaking top hatch of the sucker, killing 7 Israelis, all right, when that thing ended up detonating. That's what you're looking at right there in that video. Hold on. They do actually do a good freeze frame on this thing so you can actually see the munition itself. That they managed to get in there. Now, the interesting part is you actually see it's on very short time fuse. So that sucker was burning as that guy's running up over there to the APC in order to get it in there. I see a lot of random comments, but this ultimately is what ended up, in my opinion, being one of those first mass casualty incidents that I, kind of predict that the IDF's not going to take this shit anymore. They've been playing it a little bit nice, and today we're getting, new armor units. The IDF's 98th Division has now entered into Gaza. It is a paratrooper and commando unit that has been training for rapid and deep strike missions up over into Gaza. So not only are they increasing airstrikes, which you're about to see right up here on your screen, but they're sending in people that have been training and preparing to go forward and actually start taking the fight. So I think what we've been seeing is a lot of different shaping operations taking place over inside Gaza. I believe, if I remember right, where did this video come out of? This is in Gaza City in the Zaytun neighborhood. Airstrike was conducted. This is allegedly the aftermath of said airstrike. There's a funny comment I end up seeing down there. John Kent says, yeah, dude, I spent time in Tent City. All they have is fans, no AC, no heat. And the tents are old army tents that are well over 20 years old. They have it made if they put in AC units. Total BS. Dude, I agree with you, right? Like, if we can treat inside of the United States of America people that we end up, deeming as violent offenders, that we end up deeming as dangerous to society, child molesters, pedophiles, those people should do the harshest time, in my opinion, right? And if soldiers can deal with that crap over on the front line, you bet your ass a child molester ought to be able to spend his time inside of a freaking tent sweating his ass off in the middle of the summer thinking about the decisions he made. If he wants to whack off to the images of him molesting children, he had to do it inside of a very hot, blistering freaking tent where it's absolutely miserable and he's getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. That's just Matt's opinion. You know what I mean? And I think it's pretty freaking valid. I actually think that all of those people should basically face the death penalty, but I mean, that's just me. If you are a child molester, you should face the death penalty. There's something seriously, inherently wrong with you. There is no reason. Hear me out of this. You know what? You want to hear a rant for a second? When we release these people from prison, and I'm talking about the chomos in particular, right? The child sex offenders. When we release those people from prison, there is a lot of restrictions that end up getting put in place on them, and it's for the protection of society. We say that they're not allowed to go in X amount of feet of schools or playgrounds or any of those things. They have to register with, you know, like an open database so people know where they're at, so that for their own protection, they have to do all sorts of crap to make sure that they don't re-offend. And still, a good chunk of them end up re-offending. So my question is, if people are that big of a danger to society, why the hell are we releasing them? You know, we could take that same money that goes into those freaking, you know, massive prison systems, really nice food and all of that crap, and we can leave the chomos just stacked up inside freaking tents for all I care, right? At the same time, we have people that go over and they pay their debt to society. They make one mistake and they end up losing all the rights. They think that's a huge mistake, you know, because all it does is perpetuate the system. You know, you get labeled as a felon, right? You end up serving your time. And I'm not saying that all felons should be treated this way, but I'm saying a good chunk of them likely are, because in such states as Texas, for example, if you get caught with marijuana on you, you get labeled as a felon, right? If you get caught with a marijuana concentrate, you get labeled as a felon. You pay your debt to society and you end up getting released. Now, you're not a danger to society in Matt's opinion because you get caught with some like marijuana resin. That's just not what I think. I really don't. And I don't think that you should lose your right to self-defense. I don't think you should lose your right to vote. And I don't think that you should have to go and throw that on most job applications, put a restriction on what job applications maybe it should apply for. Federal jobs, something like that. You know, if you need a security clearance, fine. But for the most part, if you're signing up to work at McDonald's and you have to label yourself as a felon to get a job there, no. I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's right, and I think everybody just ends up getting screwed over, and it makes the system 10 times worse. Demonic AOC coming in, gifting out 50 Canadian dollars, says, just for your rants, I love them. Right. Like, if you're a danger to society, your ass should remain in prison. If you've paid your debt to society, so be it. You're like, I'm sorry, but you getting caught with a little bit of weed on you doesn't make you a danger to society, and it doesn't warrant, in my opinion, stripping somebody of their rights. It really doesn't. It really doesn't, especially when we have, like, I don't know, people that commit acts of domestic violence against their loved ones that might see a couple days in prison, all right, that end up getting released and that end up reoffending even at a larger rate than chomos most of the time. So why do we allow those people out? Why? They ought to stay in there. If you're doing crap like that in those extreme cases, ladies and gentlemen, you are a danger to society and you deserve some very harsh punishment. That's just my opinion. Gosh, dang, man. All right, let's get back over to Gaza. I'm really sorry. IDF ended up coming across even some more tunnels. Now, these things are kind of, I don't know, it's shocking to me that the IDF is still coming across this amount of tunnel systems over inside of Gaza, because they've been operating inside of there for the last 19 months, right? And even out of those 19 months on the ground, and I said it, I'll say it again, it is the size of the city of Las Vegas. You are plus or minus just a couple kilometers over inside of Gaza. And they are still coming across these massive tunnel systems over there, and they're taking them out. They're just blasting them left and right. And you got to remember, they got to clear these tunnels of all the different hostages and everybody else over there. Look at that one. It's a huge one. Now, allegedly, this tunnel in particular actually wrapped up underneath a school. Wrapped underneath a school, and that the IDF was able to go over, find it, and blast it anyways. There is, how do I want to say this? There is something fundamentally wrong with the hundreds of millions of dollars that end up getting poured into this tiny little area every single year to have that money spent on things like this. If you need evidence that Hamas is not willing to do anything but overthrow Israel, I want you to look at the amount of freaking money that has been spent on the different terror networks over inside of Gaza. Earlier on, we ended up having an engineer on the show that ended up estimating like 1 mile worth of these tunnel systems, anywhere between $750,000 to $1 million. And they have well over 400 miles worth of tunnels inside of Gaza. That is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. I can't believe that amount of money got spent. And it's not going to the people. It's not going anywhere else. That's particularly where it's going. The food crisis in Gaza is said to be worsening. All right, and I mean worsening. Here's a short video. I saw somebody say down in the comments section, Stone Cold, I'm going to get to you in a sec. And I think it's important to address this. You know, most of the time I end up reading the like super chats and things like that, but it's important to address this. Tony says, as a hardcore American, can someone tell me why I should care about Israel? Yeah, very quite simply, I can do that for you, man. And it's not Israel that you should actually give a crap about. All right. Now, I got in a very deep conversation about this yesterday, and somebody was asking me, you know, how do you explain this crap to Americans, right? Like, why should Americans actually care about this tiny little location? Because it's not about this tiny little location. And the moment you start understanding that, and the moment you start understanding the geopolitics that go into it, you start understanding why the United States of America is supporting it. Aside from the fact, all right, that you just have a radical Islamic terror organization who is a declared enemy of the United States of America, who's labeled as a foreign terror organization by the United States of America. Pretty hard pressed right now to try to say that Hamas poses a massive freaking threat to the United States of America. We end up zooming out of Gaza, okay? We end up going out, and we can just stop right here between the West Bank, you know, southern Lebanon, Syria, all of those other places. What you have over inside of these locations are a bunch of different proxy organizations from Iran, right? So you have a bunch of different proxy organizations from Iran, and pretty much every single terror organization over here has been funded by Iran. Let me zoom out just a tad bit more to start putting this into a little bit more perspective for you as we go over here. Now we're going to open up to the larger region that goes into there. Now, Hamas is also largely funded by Iran. Now, all of these little proxy terror organizations of Iran are directly supporting what's taking place over inside of Gaza. Now, these proxy organizations are also enemies of Israel, and they're also enemies of the United States of America. And as they take this fight and they start doing that, and they start attacking Israel, Israel is fighting back against them. And again, they're declared enemies of the United States of America. If we end up going down over into Syria and we start focusing on, let's say, Hezbollah, for example, or HTS. HTS is ran by a guy by the name of al-Jawlani, who founded the al-Nusra Front, who was also, prior to that, a member of Al-Qaeda, right, over inside of Iraq. Now, that man is currently running Syria. He is the de facto leader over inside of Syria. He has, hear me out on this, he has ties to Muhammad's bloodline, and he refused to join ISIS. He refused to sign up the al-Nusra Front underneath al-Baghdadi when he started ISIS because he didn't want to take part in it. He thought that the Islamic Caliphate should be Syrian-centered, or at least that's what ended up getting put out. But the truth is, in Matt's opinion, is that he was junior to al-Baghdadi, and al-Baghdadi had already declared himself as a caliph. And so what ended up happening is I think you had two people that really didn't want to contend. Now, Jawlani's goal had always been, all right, since he founded HTS, it had always been overthrowing the Assad regime and installing a Syrian-centric, all right, caliphate. That's what he's wanted to do, and he's very, very close to establishing that, and he's got ties in with the West. And so Israel is going to, is what we talked about last night, is he is very slowly starting to work with Israel. All right, he's very slowly starting to work with Israel. Israel conducted cross-border raids to arrest IRGC officials inside of Syria. Now, the IRGC, all right, Iranian or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps over inside of Iran, all right, basically the militant wing of the Ayatollah, all right, they've got rockets, they've got boots on the ground, they've got all sorts of stuff, has been working with Hezbollah, and they were working with the Assad regime over inside of Syria. Russia was partnered with the Assad regime, right? And they were doing their best to fight HTS. Again, both of these now members that we're talking about, Russia and HTS, are not friends of the United States of America. In my opinion, should we be dabbling it? Maybe not, because America's attempt to influence terrorist organizations in the past hasn't turned out very well. But if we don't, the other option that we're going to be forced to face is that Jawlani very likely is going to end up establishing another Sunni Islamic caliphate inside of Syria, which we already know how that's going to turn out across the region. Same thing with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has killed tons of U.S. service members over the freaking years, right? We can stretch back when we talk about, barracks bombings in Beirut, all sorts of crap, right? I don't even think we need to explain Hezbollah. But they also have access to chemical weapons, otherwise known as WMDs, which a lot of people are worried about. There's still over 100 chemical weapons facilities inside of Syria that Jawlani now has under his control. And that's not Matt saying that. That's independent reports that are saying that. That's intelligence assessments that are saying that. And that's actually what we know of. That's not even everything as a whole. However, if we allow Iran, who has been destabilizing the Middle East, now let's zoom out a little bit more. If we allow Iran to continue to do what they do, all right, and do this, they are destabilizing the Middle East. Now, you might not care about what's taking place over inside of the Middle East, but I know what you absolutely will care about is, number one, when bombs start going off inside of the United States, but number two, how your pocketbook ends up being affected. And if the US dollar crashes, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pretty big deal. Let's talk for a second about BRICS. Iran is friends with Russia, and they're one of the main freaking players in BRICS right now. All right. And last year, I think it was last year, maybe it was earlier this year, Iran and Russia had reaffirmed, all right, Iran's ability for peaceful nuclear energy. But part of that strategic agreement that they reaffirmed also included a different type of currency and a different banking system in which the United States and other freaking allies wouldn't be able to touch. Now, it has been rumored for a very long time that Putin and BRICS have been attempting to establish a new form of currency. When you start talking about these different BRICS nations across the Middle East, and we start zooming out a little bit, all right, and we start talking about the amount of money and oil that's going through there, if those BRICS nations start trading on that dollar and the petrodollar is done, you're looking at about a 20% increase in inflation. All right, the US dollar is going to be about 20% worse than where it's at now. You make 40 grand a year, now you might as well be making 30 grand a year. You make 100 grand a year, and now you make 80 grand a year. Then throw taxes on top of that. Your ass is basically going to be broke, and it's going to collapse the US economy. Russia's not stupid, China's not stupid, and they're not trying to go after the United States as like a force-on-force freaking conflict. No, Putin's smarter than that. He's doing exactly what the United States did to freaking Russia. We bankrupted them. And when I say Russia, I mean like the Soviet Union, right? We basically bankrupted them out of existence. And right now, what it most certainly would appear when you look at BRICS and who they're partnering with and what they're trying to do, they're trying to bankrupt the United States of America, period, flat out. And if they're successful in doing that, it's an issue. So we start by supporting Israel and by supporting their operations over inside of the Middle East, because what you're doing is you're taking away Iran's, all right, projected control over the Middle East. And that is a huge freaking factor in all of this when you start talking about oil exports, because remember how we talked about the petrodollar. If Iran is perceived to be strong and Russia is perceived to be strong, then you're going to have more nations that are going to sign up underneath them because they care about their countries and they care about making money for their people so that they don't go bankrupt. And so they're trying to pick sides. And if they pick the side of Russia, they pick the side of Iran, they pick the side of China, the US dollar is SOL. It just is. I hate to tell you that. And there's a lot of people that think I'm a freaking nut job when I talk about it, but that's my personal reasons for looking at it and why it's important to support this. It's very much important, not to mention that everything that's taking place over inside of the Red Sea, all right, with Yemen and how they ended up shutting down the merchant traffic. Dude, you're talking about, what was the figure I ended up coming up with? $164 billion, I think, that I did in research. That is a direct hit to the EU's GDP, all right, just by the Houthis shutting off the freaking Red Sea. 164 euros lost in gross domestic product for the EU because of that. That's a big freaking deal. It's a very big deal because the amount of commerce that's being traded between the US and the EU, it's astronomical. It's a ton. And when they start facing inflation, guess what? You also feel that strain over here in the United States of America. And by not dealing with this crap, that's what you're allowing to happen. Big Bork Little Bite coming in with $2. Sorry, that was another rant. Save more money. PD files get to meet Chippy. Yeah, I mean, I'm down with that, right? Pedophiles. That's what he's saying. Pedophiles get to meet Chippy. I'm all about that life as well. You know, there's very few instances I agree with actually chopping people's hands off, and that's one where I think you ought to just chop their damn hands off at a minimum before you release them, is pedophiles. If you're out molesting children, you need to have your dang hands cut off. That's just Matt's opinion on that, right? And I'm just stating it like I don't agree with pedophiles. Let's get back over and talk about Gaza for a hot minute, because I ended up telling you guys I think there's a little bit more credibility when it goes down to the humanitarian efforts inside Gaza. Maybe not necessarily failing, but people that are starting to slowly refuse to show up to these distribution points, and a lot of the humanitarian aid is getting robbed. And so it's forcing people back into that little starvation, which is pushing Hamas's role forward, right? I haven't seen videos like this in a while. All right, that I have up on your screen right now. All these people, hold on, let me play it. I gotta mute it because they're just screaming. It's essentially a soup kitchen, right? Now, this is not a staged video, in my opinion. This is actually people that are going over and getting food distributed to them over inside of Gaza. This is a huge problem, huge problem when it goes down to the human terrain over inside of Gaza. If the people perceive, and this video is being reported of coming out of Khan Yunis, all right? Now, if these people perceive that the IDF and that the U.S. PMCs can't take care of them and give themselves food, and they're relying on Hamas to give them food, and they're relying on like this broken ass system that's over there right now to distribute humanitarian aid, you are going to end up losing the popular support of the people. While they might not like Hamas, they like to eat. And this was the problem that the U.S. faced over inside of Afghanistan. We failed to recognize the fact for about a decade that the Taliban actually supplied financial aid and stability to the people over inside of Afghanistan. And because of that, what ended up happening was you had people that were joining up to fight alongside the Taliban, all right, joining up to fight alongside the Taliban for monetary reasons. If you look at that country and you go back in time, what you end up discovering is that when the Soviets were there back in like the 80s, that there was this mass migration down over into Pakistan of all of these Afghans, and they ended up staying in refugee camps and things like that over inside of Pakistan. When that war finally ended and people started to migrate and go back into Afghanistan, they had lost because the like median age of an adult male over there is 38 years old, right? 38. And so for the 2 decades that they ended up spending over inside of Pakistan before migrating back to where they came from, what you ended up seeing was them losing the knowledge, because there's a lot of knowledge that goes into these things, right? They lost the knowledge on how to farm. They lost the knowledge on how to preserve their food. They ended up hunting all of the wildlife out of existence, and then they couldn't take care of themselves. And so they would go and they'd get a loan from the Taliban, and that persisted for years. And then add on the global war on terror, the U.S. entering into Afghanistan, and all of the instability that took place over there. That was lost. And what ended up happening was you had people that wanted to feed their families. They'd take loans from the Taliban, and they'd agree to work in their freaking opium fields. They'd agree to do all sorts of crap. And when the U.S. started targeting the opium fields, those people still owed a debt to the Taliban. And then they'd turn around, they'd go and they'd plant IEDs, they'd pick up in the fighting season, they'd start fighting again. So when we start talking about people starving over inside Gaza, it is a much bigger deal than people just being hungry. Because if these people can't feed themselves and they're relying on Hamas to do it, then they're going to start owing debts, right? Like if you really start thinking about it, they're going to feel indebted to Hamas, and they're going to feel like the U.S. government and that the freaking Israeli government can't protect them. And that is going to make this problem even worse. So this within itself is a much bigger deal than people look about it. It is not all about, all right, making sure that the poor old Palestinians aren't starving. I agree that they basically should be sleeping in the bed that they made. All right, if we go back and we look at videos from October 7th inside of Gaza City, and you see just thousands of people storming the streets, beating the hell out of freaking hostage bodies that are being drugged through Gaza, yeah, I think they deserve everything they have. I can point out to different studies where, you know, like the vast majority of Palestinian people, in a survey that was conducted by the Palestinian Center for Survey Policy Research Development or some crap, whatever that was, that like 97% of the people that didn't view videos, Palestinians, and this is a Palestinian organization that ended up going over and conducting a survey with Palestinians at tons of different locations across the West Bank and Gaza, interviewing one-on-one with these people. And they determined that a massive chunk, over 95% of them that didn't see the videos, didn't think that any atrocities were committed on October 7th. And out of the Palestinians that did see the videos from October 7th, you still had like 85+% of them that still said no atrocities were committed. And so when it goes down into wanting to make sure that the people inside of Gaza actually pick up and start getting along with the freaking choo-choo train and getting rid of Hamas, things like this are extremely important. Extremely important, because the narrative that's been pushed into their head since they were freaking children is that the IDF, the United States of America, were all the freaking devil and we want to do nothing but kill them. And when Hamas is out there perpetrating the narrative by shooting people that are going to get humanitarian aid, they perpetrate that narrative amongst the people, and it is a confirmation belief that they end up getting. Because of that, you'll end up having more people that join against Hamas, and this thing is going to drag out. So this is 10 times more important than people actually think. I don't give two shits if these people are hungry. What I give two shits about is making sure that they don't pick up arms and fight alongside Hamas. Demon AOC says, yep, darn good rant. Appreciate it, Demon AOC. I don't think a lot of people, think this thoroughly through. I really don't. A lot of people don't want to put money towards this and everything else. But the truth is, if you want to get rid of the threat to America, there is a little bit of hearts and minds games that you have to play to keep them from going the other direction. BB88, love you to death, brother. You say, why don't they all just go to Gaza and chill out? Well, I don't know, man. I don't know why a lot of people that are over here in the United States, they're pushing, like this Palestinian narrative, don't just go to Gaza and calm the hell down, like personally. Little combat video that ended up coming out of Gaza just recently. I figure you guys might like to look at IDF moving through Gaza. Pretty crazy that you end up seeing all that construction equipment and stuff over there inside. And you can definitely take a look at Gaza. Now, people are looking at this and saying that, you know, the IDF is like major freaking issue. I actually did the numbers. So casualties over inside of Gaza right now are just being reported by the PHA of coming out right over 56,000. Maybe it crossed 57,000 yesterday, but right around 56,000. Now, the average amount of deaths inside Gaza pre-war, just natural deaths, all right, people that are dying of old age, people that are dying from disease, people that are dying from whatever, was right around 1,000 a month in 2023. And that's the last estimate that we have to make that accurate. So what's that mean? Well, if we were to assume that those numbers were accurate, which likely they are, you can go ahead and knock off 20,000 Gazans that are on that number of 56 or 57,000 and take that all the way down to 36 or 37,000 Gazans that have died as a part of this war. If we go and we take the IDF's estimates of right around 20,000 enemy KIA, we can take that and chop that off as well, which would leave about 16,000. Now, people would look at that and they say, dude, that's not fair. That's just the IDF. Fine, we'll chop that down to 16,000 deaths. I think that's fair. So chop those off. That leaves us with 20,000. Now, I want you to estimate the number of civilians that were killed by Hamas as a result of collateral damage. They've been firing mortars, they've been firing rockets, they've been shooting into the freaking air, they've been shooting all over the place, and those bullets and those rockets and those mortars fall and kill people. How many of those people do you think are attributed to Hamas? I think 5,000 is a fair low estimate, so that takes us down to 15,000 civilians as a result of collateral damage. If Israel is trying to commit genocide, it is one of the worst freaking attempts in human history. That number alone, even taking low estimates from Israel, taking low estimates of Hamas collateral damage, still puts the IDF at having greater, all right, than a 1-to-1 civilian to enemy combatant ratio. You're likely looking at half a civilian to 3/4 a civilian per enemy combatant, just doing the rough math. It's absolutely ridiculous. They've strangely only lost women and children inside of Gaza. Yeah, imagine that. They've only lost women and children over inside of Gaza. My freaking butt, they only lost women and children over inside of Gaza. You know, a lot of those children that they end up claiming too are fighting age males. And a lot of people don't like to admit that either, that you have fighting age males over inside of Gaza that are picking up AKs. Dude, even at the last freaking body exchange, all right, where we had the Red Cross and everybody over there and they made a big freaking thing about it. You saw kids as young as like 5 years old dressed up in uniforms with freaking AKs. All right, to state that they don't use child soldiers is absolutely ridiculous. And when we started calling them out on this podcast, and several others picked up on it as well, back last year when the IDF ended up going to Rafah, because we actually saw videos of child soldiers and we started calling it out, only then did Hamas and the Al-Quds brigades stop releasing videos of the kids, and they started putting, started putting like filters and stuff like that over their faces so you couldn't make out like the general age. It was blocking out like upper bodies and things like that, and specifically clipping them so it didn't come out. There's a hell of a lot more disinformation in this war than I think I've seen in a lot of them. The only thing that even rivals or comes remotely close is the amount of like propaganda that ends up coming out of the Kremlin over inside of Russia. Now, over inside of Khan Yunis, again, they ended up issuing out new evacuation orders and pushing people out. People are now migrating up over into Al-Mawasi. That's where they're supposed to be pushing out. And with the increased airstrikes over there and with the infill of this new freaking brigade that's going in, I could only imagine that they're about to do a major push over inside of Khan Yunis. And it makes sense for why they're doing it when you look at the issues that they're having with the humanitarian aid distribution over inside of Gaza. So if we zoom in on that sucker and we take a look at it, you've got the majority of these humanitarian aid distribution sites that are taking place down here in the south. And it's about a freaking 45-minute walk to get from Khan Yunis down to Gaza. And it's a second largest city inside of Gaza. You've got a major Hamas stronghold inside of that city. All right. And if the IDF wants to stop all of these attacks on the humanitarian aid distribution, then they must center their efforts on Khan Yunis. I think you're going to have a major operation because of this taking place over inside of Khan Yunis. I think the IDF is going to push in there very, very hard to try to eliminate that threat and create an additional buffer zone for the people that are moving down into Al-Mawasi. That's what I think. Al-Mawasi, for those of you guys that don't know, is actually right up over here along the coast. Okay, you guys can kind of see me circling it with the cursor. That's where Al-Mawasi is at. And then you have Khan Yunis. Becomes readily apparent when you actually switch it over and you look at like what this city looks like in relation to where the humanitarian aid distribution sites are taking place down there. So yeah, in Matt's opinion, the IDF, and again, we can go from the middle of Rafah, I don't know, let's just do measure distance from there to the middle of Khan Yunis. Dude, it's less than 4 miles, all right? You're talking about 6 kilometers, all right, from city center to city center, and they're not traveling that great of a distance. So the IDF, in my opinion, is about to be pushing in and taking out Hamas inside of Khan Yunis. I think you're going to see a huge war effort there in the next, like, coming days to week, all right, of the IDF pushing into Khan Yunis, all right, with the threats of Trump talking about having the ceasefire agreement and et cetera, taking place. I would think for dang sure that the IDF is going to want to create a buffer zone. My bet is on Khan Yunis is about to be a very big battle that's about to start taking place, and I think we're going to start seeing more information coming out of there. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. I very much enjoyed doing all the research for you guys. I will talk to y'all here later on this evening at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and please consider becoming a true supporter. It costs less than a cup of coffee every single month. All it takes is the price of 1 cup of coffee, and you can be a true supporter. Keep this information flowing. Ladies and gentlemen, peace, love, happiness, and God bless. I, ladies and gentlemen, am out of here.